Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of Modern Media Review. I'm Robin Gibson.
And I'm Sean Goligly.
And I feel a bit inadequate, Sean, because that's all there is, isn't it?
Not for the first time, I'm sure.
Robin Gibson and Sean Goligly. I was looking, a podcast, isn't it? Stick some music at the beginning, some at the end, the odd time check. It's 6:32pm at the moment.
I think our team's lacking in depth.
Well, yeah, because I was looking at the Guardian's Farewell Maybot podcast the other day.
Sounds like a big production.
Oh, yeah, 3 presenters, fair enough. 3 producers and 2 executive producers. Makes me feel our team's a bit thin.
It is a bit thin on the ground. We need to bring in an executive producer.
Or 2, yeah. We'll
At
get
least
some
2.
next week. Get some next week that can sit behind us.
We'll get Donald Trump in as an executive producer.
Well, there you see, he's a team of one, isn't he? And that's what we're going to talk about this week, because in the wake of last week's visit to the UK and Ireland...
State visit.
He's a one-man team, isn't he, who manages to virtually silence all opposition. And I thought, looking at some of the tweets that started even before he'd landed, these tweets are worth a review in themselves. He's a one-man medium.
Well, of course, he had the whole spat with... he's got history. He's got beef with Sadiq Khan for a start. It would be nice if he had actually spelled Sadiq's name correctly. He managed to spell Khan wrong, but...
Only once. I thought it was brilliant when he was actually tweeting on the plane before he got here that Khan was a stone-cold loser. It's one of those phrases he uses that's just like, so what the hell does he mean, a stone-cold loser?
Well, obviously he won the election, therefore must be a loser, I'd imagine. That
tweet actually got a great reply from someone saying, is this a parody account? And someone said, no, it's a parody president. And I thought that's exactly what it is, really, or that's what it seems like if it wasn't so dangerous. Although, is he so dangerous? You know, he did all that stuff with Mexico, didn't he? And then suddenly at the end of the week he started tweeting about how he didn't need the tariffs and everything was going to be hunky-dory. It's a lot of bluster, isn't it?
This was a bit of a sort of, although it was a state visit, it's a bit like if you invited someone that you're not really sure about round to dinner, and before they even get to the house, they start tweeting, have to go to dinner with this bunch of slags, and I'm sure the food's going to be crap, and everyone just goes, oh, well, that's him. He's a rude, belligerent, nasty piece of work, but that's just him,
Yeah, but he's entertaining. He's like a political version of Oasis. Except he's not even drunk or on drugs. Well, we don't think he is.
Well, he's not he's got no excuse because obviously he's teetotal.
Yeah, I noticed when he arrived. Is he teetotal? I didn't know that.
He is, yeah. Diet Pepsi is his...
Diet Pepsi?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say it was some sugar-filled drink that was getting him all hyped up. I noticed when he arrived, right, he retweeted a welcome tweet from someone saying how glad they were he'd arrived, but the problem was it was from the US Embassy. They're obviously going to say that, aren't they? And then he went on to say that he had a big crowd of well-wishers. It was just a blatant lie.
Oh, it was massive crowds, didn't you? He said there were thousands of people waving and cheering at the great president.
He got mixed up with the
protest.
The protest. The thing is, you could read out his tweets all day long. Some of them are very funny, but I found a website that's absolutely fantastic that I think we should mention called it's TrumpTwitterArchive.com, which has got all his latest tweets, all his tweets categorised, tweets about fake news, tweets about collusion, tweets about Russia, and you can just search the whole thing by word or term, whatever you want. It's absolutely fantastic. And actually halfway through the week, apropos of nothing, it wasn't really connected to the state visit, he tweeted about Russia and Venezuela, saying that he was pleased to announce that Russia had removed all their people, whatever their people were doing, from Venezuela, which again got a load of good replies saying, like, well, now, that's great, now let us know when they're going to be removed from the White House. And he just ploughs on. The next thing he's tweeting about Bette Midler. What the hell was that? Washed up psycho, Bette Midler. Don't know what she'd done. I've heard her called a lot of things, but not a washed up psycho.
But it is funny, this whole reporting even of the Trump visit, because the BBC, obviously our state broadcaster, we had the BBC reporting at Buckingham Palace and various points around London and saying what a big turnout there had been to greet the president on his state visit. And when they panned across, it was like tumbleweed, crossing the screens, and about 2 or 3 people looking slightly confused, obviously got to Buckingham Palace when they were trying to get to Madame Tussauds, Yeah,
but that's the totally corrupt media, as Trump puts it.
Well, talk about fake news. We had the BBC, as I said, which is supposed to be an impartial national broadcaster, talking about the anti-Trump demonstration that was congregating at Trafalgar Square and then passing down Whitehall into Parliament Square, where Jeremy Corbyn, who apparently, according to the Daily Mail, was ranting wild-eyed and frothing at the mouth, which I thought was quite
I
interesting.
didn't see him frothing at the mouth.
He was. I think he had rabies.
Yeah, maybe he has. Maybe that's a problem.
Well,
He's
I think
a rabid socialist, communist, Marxist, Leninist, something like that.
Well, I think it's the only thing that they haven't accused him of having yet, so that could be next week. Shock horror, Corbyn has rabies.
They've got to dig up something like that soon, haven't they?
They have. But the thing about the BBC was saying that...
They're totally corrupt, mate. That's the thing about them. In fact, he tweeted on the 5th of June, if the totally corrupt media was less corrupt, he obviously doesn't want it to be completely uncorrupt. He'd be up by 15 points in the polls based on his tremendous success. Maybe the best ever. That's what... He's got this habit of doing what I call comic capitals, where he suddenly put best ever with cap B and cap E.
Absolutely.
It's a sort of semi-literate thing, that suddenly capitalising things, you know?
Well, he is interesting. So the BBC said anyway about this Trump protest that there were hundreds of people there, you know, anti-Trump activists. Yeah. And if you looked at it, the whole of the Whitehall and Trafalgar Square was full, which, although Donald Trump said most of them were tourists, which I thought was a nice line, you'd have to say more than hundreds to fill that
Hundreds
stretch.
of people is what you get in Dingwalls. Or the 100 Club.
Yeah, exactly. It is quite funny when he's ranting on about fake news because, you know, people have done studies of how he tweets and he does have pretty strong patterns of it. About 20% of his tweets start off either him in the first person or the president of the USA. And a lot of them also, 10% of them kick off with fake news, failing, dishonest, corrupt. Which I think is interesting because it's I think it could be a form of projection, really, because you know, he's protesting a little bit too much and it's sort of a little bit all too close to home, that sort of stuff, isn't it?
Some of it I honestly think, as I said, he's deliberately been funny. He says things like, nobody but Donald Trump will save Israel, and nobody understands politicians like I do. You can't possibly take any of this seriously. My IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. That's just taking a mickey, isn't it? He's not really...
I'm not so sure, because when he was criticising Sadiq Khan, he employed one of his favourite things, which was obviously learned early in the school ground, when he said, and he's very little, very small, only half the size of the mayor of New York, and failing awfully. And what's the next thing, you know? And he stinks, like really stinks, and I think he shit himself. He shit himself in the classroom.
But I did point, I found one tweet when he was talking about reporters and dishonesty from 2014, where he says, I don't know who he was talking about, so I couldn't be bothered ploughing through the whole thread, but he says, a dishonest slob of a reporter who doesn't understand my sarcasm when I'm talking about him or his wife, which... Makes you wonder why he's talking about his wife.
Well, maybe...
But he does claim to be using sarcasm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very, very bizarre. Who was it? Was it Cruz that he said had very small hands, with all that implies? I mean, this is quite bizarre that he uses this sort of like childlike insulting to sort of put people down. But it plays obviously popular, you know?
I think he knows he's putting out stuff that entertains people. Look at his thing at the end of this week about the moon. That came out of nowhere as well. I mean, I don't know what all the fuss is about. Why he's making a fuss about NASA spending money. But he said, for all the money we're spending, NASA should not be talking about going to the moon. It should be focused on much bigger things like Mars, brackets, of which the moon is a part. Well, the moon's not a part of Mars, is it?
Yeah, it's a little bunion attached to the side of Mars, isn't it?
I thought it was part of Earth that had broken off in some sort of asteroid thing. It's definitely not part of Mars anyway.
Can you imagine if Trump was a teacher? It'd be phenomenal, wouldn't it?
I think he sees himself as a kind of teacher, and he sees us as what used to be called remedial students. At my school, they used to have a room where they were all locked in, and they didn't really teach them. It was grim. People think that era is something to look back on fondly, but at least they get out now.
Well, I think they can march about and do whatever they want. There's no discipline in schools anymore, Robin. That's the problem. What they need is a bloody good hiding.
Well, especially the learning difficulties ones.
Yeah, you really need to beat up on them.
Do you know what I was thinking about this though? Like, in a way, we would have been good to have a view from our Letter from America correspondent Ben Diamond, wouldn't it? Do people in America even care what Trump's saying about other countries or that he's in the UK? I mean, they don't even know where it is, do they? When you see these things where they have to point out countries on the map, they get it all wrong and say that Iran's China and Australia's Israel and stuff like that. They probably couldn't care less.
I don't want to sound all superior, especially since we've left the European Union and, elected all sorts of lunatics into the European Parliament. But I think most of them can't even identify individual states.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I wouldn't like to allege that without any proof.
Well, fake news.
It sounds a bit Trump-like, doesn't it?
It does sound Trump-like. But this is the thing nowadays with... This is something about Twitter that I find quite phenomenal as well, is that you just need to put out a load of blather, and it doesn't matter. There's no fact-checking. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. You just can say anything, and you can say the exact opposite the next day, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't seem to haunt you.
The more noise you make, the more confused people get. I mean, that's what Trump does. That's what I said. He just keeps shouting really loud, and in a way it's clever, even though it's stupid.
Well, within this maelstrom of Twitter and controversy and rudeness and crass behaviour, you can push through interesting little things, like when he was talking about the trade deal with Britain, how it was going to be great for Britain. For me, it just sounded a little bit worrying, like somebody who was basically saying to you, yeah, we're going to come to your house and basically we're going to gut it, steal everything. It's going to be phenomenal for me.
It's going to be tremendous.
It's going to be absolutely tremendous. Very profitable for me. Maybe not for you.
But then he just dropped in the NHS, didn't he? Saying, that'll be on the table, obviously.
Yeah, you could see May squirming.
Everyone had to backpedal, but he's stuck it into the mix now, hasn't he? So he's already moved the goalposts. I noticed that in his whole Twitter barrage during the state visit, welcome to Britain, huge crowds, Bette Midler being a washed-up psycho, and the moon being a part of Mars. He didn't once tweet about the NHS. Or chlorinated chicken, for that matter. The actual serious issues of what might happen in a trade deal are kind of... He hasn't bothered to talk about them.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It'd be like, eating your chicken down the swimming bars. I mean, is that so bad? When you used to go swimming, the whole place was reeking of chlorine, Well, it's fun. Well,
I don't know if they had chlorine. I've just been reading this novel by a guy called Upton Sinclair called The Jungle, which is from the early 20th century, about the appalling conditions in the meat packing plants in Chicago. And don't know if they'd chlorine then, but you want to see what they were doing with the... Put it this way, they used everything they could and then adulterated what they couldn't.
Formaldehyde.
Well, but this is the thing. I mean, they're talking about the milk that people were drinking in the towns being watered down and doctored with formaldehyde.
Nice touch.
And tea and coffee, sugar and flour, canned peas, all doctored, canned peas coloured with copper salt and fruit jam coloured with aniline dye. So Americans have been used to this for a long time and nothing's happened, has it?
And also it's been scientifically proved that formaldehyde in milk is good for you.
I was thinking when I was reading this, it makes the Grapes of Wrath sound a bit like Mr. Happy, so grim. And it reminded me, I was thinking about Trump's literacy, and then it reminded me to go off track a wee bit here. Did you read this article a few weeks ago about John Steinbeck's books compared to the Mr. Men books?
No.
The most ludicrous bit of academic research I've ever read. It says Roger Hargreaves' Mr. Greedy is only slightly easier to read than John Steinbeck's classic Of Mice and Men. Absolutely absurd. I mean, they've got some kind of analysis test for complexity of writing, right? And Gulliver's Travels is rated as the hardest book to read. And they give you some quotes, right? Mr. Greedy liked to eat. In fact, Mr. Greedy loved to eat, and the more he ate, the fatter he became.
Oh, Hang on. Well, can you go over that again? I got lost in the second bit.
That's supposed to be just as hard to read as The Water is Warm Too, for it has slipped twinkling over the yellow sands in the sunlight before reaching the narrow pool.
Well, that's pretty simplistic, Robin. Come on. I mean, that hasn't got the style, the grace, and the structure of Hargreaves.
Mr. Greedy doesn't say anything about mottled white recumbent limbs that arch over the pool, does it?
Too many notes, Mozart.
Anyway, Mr. Greedy is much better written than Trump's tweets, really, isn't it? I wonder where he'd fit in this reading complexity thing. They'd probably have to get beneath zero, wouldn't they?
But the thing I do like about Twitter is that, and it's also one of its terrible failings, is that it allows people like Donald to put out all this barrage of nonsense and all the rest of it. But there is something quite compelling about the fact that you're, a keyboard separated from the from the President of the United States. It's quite interesting, really.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm not sure. Some people do read your replies, and I'm aware of that. From occasionally if you tweet at a musician or something like that you like, or about something they've done, they'll actually respond to it or retweet it. But I don't see Trump saying much to these people who take the piss out of him.
Well, I mean, his own stuff is too important to read other people's stuff. I mean, this is patently obvious, isn't it? The best ever president is a very busy man. Caps.
I mean, I just think, people slag off Twitter for this, but people sort of suggest it's coarse in social and political discourse. But the only reason that you didn't feel like this in the past was because Twitter wasn't there. If other leaders and stars and celebrities had Twitter in the 60s or the 70s or whenever, I'm sure they'd just have been as bad. Imagine Thatcher on Twitter,
Well, yeah.
She'd probably have had she'd probably just have used some sort of bot that just automatically batted down any criticism.
No, what she would have done was come round to your house and give you a right hectoring face to face. Churchill would have been a classic on Twitter. Late of a night when he'd been on the Paul Roger and whiskey and was off his
Paul
face,
Roger?
Basically. Favourite champagne, Paul Roger.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And he'd be off his face. He'd be sending out all expletive-ridden tweets that would have to be sort of redacted the next day,
Very long threads he would have, though. He was a bit long-winded, wasn't he?
Well, can you imagine Kinnock on Twitter? There's no way 140 characters cover his stuff.
Well, I was sort of looking into Stalin, actually, because...
As you do.
Digressing a bit, because on the last podcast when we were talking about Thatcher, we mentioned Arthur Scargill and wondered if he was still alive, which he is. And I was having a look at what he's up to, or recently been up to, and apparently he's quite involved in something called the Stalin Society. Which I didn't even know existed in Britain. Apparently there's several of them around the world. Stalin would have been amazing on Twitter, because Stalin would have had so much beef, wouldn't he? Not only with the opposite side, but with his own side. He's been written out of this D-Day thing, hasn't he? It's appalling. The way things were going last week, you'd think that America and Britain solely won the war, overlooking 20 million Russians.
Yeah, well, I mean, 20 million Russians helped. Stalingrad was a bit of a leg up.
He'd have been furious. Well, that's the most important battle of the whole thing, isn't it?
Basically, yeah. It was the one that turned the tide.
Yeah, Stalin would be absolutely furious. He'd probably get banned from Twitter. I understand what people think about Stalin, but I've always had a theory about the original Soviets, that they're a bit like the Beach Boys. And that, obviously Lenin's Brian Wilson, who's the original. He's the creative genius of the whole thing. He was sadly chopped off. I mean, not by drugs and going a bit mad, but by dying. Trotsky's the kind of Dennis Wilson, who's the pesky, troublesome one. And Stalin's a bit like Carl Wilson, he's calm, he's immensely talented, but as time has gone on, he's only got a faint idea of what it was he was doing in the first place and why it was good, and he's kind of forgotten about the original motivation, which you used to see in Carl Wilson when the Beach Boys were playing Latter Day without Brian. I think he's had a bit of a bum deal all round, really.
It is tough for him, I mean, and not all mass murderers are bad, Well,
no, I think they are as mass murderers. Anyway, the Stalin Society kind of seeks to reverse all these opinions about mass murderers. Bit of revisionism going on. And also, a bit I looked at was a piece on the website slagging off George Orwell and Animal Farm.
Well, he's a splitter, that Orwell, isn't he?
Calling him a trash novelist and an anti-communist, and laying into the education guides that the literature guides for students that just compare the characters in Animal Farm to Lenin, Trotsky and Stalin. Yeah. It's a point of view.
It is a point of view. But talking about the D-Day...
Bad one, probably.
Talking about the D-Day commemorations, didn't Theresa get the date wrong?
She did tweet the wrong date for D-Day. An easy mistake to make when you're all keyed up around D-Day. Did she actually mix it up with the date of her own official resignation?
Well, that would have been, a bigger day, surely. We'll look back on it in 75 years' time. Well, she's a stone-cold loser anyway.
She got the date
I can't even
wrong,
be bothered with her. Stone-cold loser. And she's got such big hands. She's got absolutely massive hands.
Problem is, it's typical of all these people. I mean, you get a guy like Sadiq
And her
Khan
breath probably smells as well.
Yeah.
She's got a really shit haircut, too.
But this is the problem. This is the standard of all these politicos on Twitter.
What's this latest thing where Gove now... I mean, we had the opium smoker putting himself forward for leader of the Conservative Party. Now we've got Gove coming out on about his cocaine binges. I mean, what next? They were all at raves. Boris Johnson's going to say, I was massively into sort of like to bang a few E's at a rave.
I think the point I was trying to make is that they're so shallow, and why are they coming out with all this stuff, and why are they slagging each other off like this, and why, as you said earlier before we started the podcast, it's 6:56 p.m. now, by the way. That,
I like that. That's good.
Boris Johnson's just threatened to take back the money or something. That's his best gambit to Europe, is you're not having the money. It's playground stuff, isn't it? It is pretty poor when you get a fairly efficient technocrat like Sadiq Khan, and Trump decides to slag him off as a loser, whereas he's clearly a guy who gets things done and doesn't go on about it.
Yeah, but he's very little.
He's got that funny tinge, hasn't he?
Muslim as well.
Yeah.
Ask Zach Goldsmith about him. He's virtually in Hezbollah, isn't he? Yeah, that's whole Twitter. I was thinking when we were talking about the likes of Stalin and Churchill and whoever on Twitter. Can you imagine if Mother Teresa was on Twitter now and she'd be saying, "Oh, everyone, I've been looking after these people and poor children." You'd have a load of trolls on there going, this is all fake. You're a disgrace, Mother Teresa. They're all beggars and they're making loads of money. And this is all fake news. These people don't exist.
That's what I meant about people from the past. That was how we started that discussion, is that you can't tell what would have happened. People say that it's much coarser now, and we've just been saying it is coarse. But on the other hand, you can't tell what it... Basically, Twitter's allowed people to come out and say whatever they like, totally unfiltered, as soon as it comes into their head, and in Trump's case, big head, tiny brain. And it may well have
He's
been
got the highest IQ in the world, which has been scientifically proved and tested.
That. We all know that.
well known that is, mate.
Anyway, I feel that there's a bit too much hatred and bile in the past. We've done Thatcher, we've done Trump on Twitter, which means that next week we should really talk about Love Island. Your suggestion.
I am a fan of Love Island.
Just to get things a bit more...
I think I am the demographic for it as well.
I've never seen it. To do this, I'm going to have to start watching it this week.
Well, I think this is a good excuse for you to say, I've never watched it. I know for a fact that secretly this is on Series Link. On your TiVo
I've never
box.
Ever seen it. The first thing I looked at something about it this week, and I noticed that these people are meant to be kind of
What do you mean these people? That's a bit pejorative.
People on Love Island. And I'm not saying we do need more love and not so much hate. I feel like I've been immersed in hate for the past two podcasts. But they're meant to be kind of not role models, fabulous people.
Well, they're they're mostly of a type, what you'd imagine as attractive, good-looking people.
Yeah, so anyway, I scanned some newspaper article. It turned out the first guy they were talking about was meant to be the ultimate sort of Love Island guy, and the current episode is from Airdrie. That can't be right.
Anton.
Airdrie?
Yeah, Anton's from Airdrie, mate. That's where all the beautiful people come from.
Have you ever been to Airdrie?
My uncle lived in Airdrie.
Lived there. He wasn't from there, though. It's different. They've got different sort of people up there. Like
all right, mate. Not so anti-immigrant. He did go over there from Ireland.
I don't mean that. They've got the old species, Homo erectus and Neanderthalis and things like that. They all pitched up in places like Airdrie. I'd be interested to see if this character gets out his orange sash for the marching season.
They'd be a bit confused if he was banging away on the Lambeg drum. I need a time check. Get our executive producer to prompt us for a time check.
Yeah, he says it's 1 minute past 7.
Cool.
And it's probably time to wrap up the podcast.
Well, I'm looking forward to you watching Love Island every night.
I'm not going to watch it every night. I'll watch it all in one.
You're going to miss all the nuances.
We need some intellectual ballast here somewhere.
Well, we've got some interesting stuff on the website if people want to check it out.
Yeah, check that out. Oh yeah, we better plug all that, hadn't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you might be
we got the new piece on there, which I like, which is a review of Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody.
It's on the website at modernmediareview.com. The podcasts are on the website. They're also on YouTube. You could listen to on there and subscribe. They're also on iTunes and Spotify. And we've got Twitter and Facebook, but we don't go on about that too much. But
best ever podcast this was.
Which was?
Well, I think you'll find this was the best ever podcast, Robin.
Well, that's because our IQ is 2 of the highest. And you all know it.
Just check our record.
And the least racist people there are, apart from Donald Trump.
Who is the least?
Is the least, yeah. And on that completely fake note, we'll sign off and say thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye and good night.
Catch you next time.